Good morning. I'd like to thank everyone, Baruch Hashem, once again for coming. It's a pleasure to see everyone here live. Be'ez Hashem, this is the way we should do it from this point forward. In particular, thank Harvey for everything he does on a weekly basis, but also Avram Eliezer Friedman, who doesn't just set up the internet connections, live stream, he always ends up doing much more than that. So thank you, Avram Eliezer. And the topic in today's share, the Wild West of Gittin, working on amicable solutions, is really a topic I've wanted to talk about for a while. But really what spurred me to do it this week was the unfortunate passing of Rabbi Lerfeld, that's all. Local Rav of the Young Israel here in Miami. At the same time, a tremendous Baki, worldwide expert in Gittin, who we were zocheh to know right here. And when you talk about Gittin, it's obviously a very sensitive situation. On the one hand, you have a couple, whether they were married for a short amount of time, or in many cases could be married for a long time, and where the situation leads to a point where they're ready to get divorced. It obviously could be a situation, especially if there are children involved, especially when there are disputes over money, or even just because of the fact they're not happy with each other and that's why they're getting divorced, where the process of divorce, and in the halacha, the most important process, the only process of divorce, is the giving of a get. That sometimes is a situation where the husband refuses to give a get. There could also be situations where the woman refuses to receive the get. But there could be a major dispute in the facilitating of a get. And that could lead to major problems. There are cases of women who could sit for years, even decades, without receiving a get. And that's a classic definition of an aguna. A woman who's chained, a woman who halachically can't go anywhere. She's stuck. And it's obviously a sad situation. And throughout the years, there's always been do-gooders, people trying to get involved. There was a story years back, not so long ago, where there was an underground business. Actually, in researching the share, someone told me he knows some of the people involved, where there are rabbanim and there are goons. I assume many of them operating l'shem shamayim, who literally would beat the living daylights out of a husband who wouldn't give a get. It was famous that they used all types of instruments to harm the fellows. I think the cover of the tabloids in New York talked about the cattle prods, which probably, not so, doesn't go down so easily that way. And there's little major force being used to get a husband to give a get. Fortunately, those cases were publicized. People were arrested, people sat in jail, and, not a happy ending. Recently, there's been a lot of news in the Jewish world, the frum world, where people have organized protests. Not just protests by the person's house who's not giving a get, That's been going on for decades. But the new age social media pressure involved basically plastering someone's face all over social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, with pictures and stories. This is the guy who's not giving his wife a get for X amount of time. And these movements, they've spurred, what they call them, spontaneous riots in front of people's houses, and a lot of pressure on flash mobs, on a lot of pressure on the husbands, and sometimes even the family of the husband to give a get. And the questions we'll deal with today, is this mutter or not mutter? Are these things allowed? Are they not allowed? I specifically chose the term Wild West for the following reason. After Rav David Feinstein was nifter, there are a lot of interesting stories going around. So there's one story, I'll leave the neighborhood about it. The story was set out. But Rav David would field questions from all over the Jewish world, all different topics, anywhere Dalet Chelkei Shulchan Aruch and beyond, Rav David Feinstein Zatzal was receiving questions. But a lot of times when you receive a question, just the premise of the question and the mindset of the person asking the question reveals a lot about what they understand of halacha and the like. So he was getting questions from within a certain neighborhood, certain practices, and Rav David answered the fellow, but he turned to the people next to him and said, boy, that neighborhood is really the Wild West. Like, to him it was like, where are they coming up with such crazy, kooky ideas that this is, this is part of halacha? So I think the world of Gittin probably deserves to be called the Wild West, because there is a lot of funny business that goes on. And today's share, we will try to touch upon some of those topics.
If a husband doesn't give a get, he can't get married either.
Let me clarify, that's an excellent point.
Or are there rabbis out there that'll do it?
So some say, right, some brought up, why is the woman the only one suffering? If the husband doesn't give a get, isn't he also going to suffer? So the unfortunate answer to that question is no. Husbands don't suffer in many of these cases, because there's a concept in halacha. Rabbeinu Gershom made a cherem dating back the times of the Rishonim, that a Ashkenazic man cannot have two wives. I hope everyone got my diak there. An Ashkenazic man cannot have two wives. However, there's an idea called a heter mei rabban. If you get 100 rabbis to sign that in your situation, that heter does the Isser, the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom, not to have two wives, does not apply. Practically speaking, one could get remarried based on that. There are Rabbanim that will remarry you to a new wife, as long as you have a Heter Mei Rabbanim to get you around it. And, Heter Mei Rabbanim, some of them are quite shady. What constitutes a rabbi? Oh, look at the phone book in Borough Park, there are lots of rabbis. Anyone who has a beard, you're a rabbi. You want to sign this petition? So there are many cases where the husband can leave his wife stranded for years, but he gets one of these heterim and he's off and running. He could be divorced, he could be through a few women by the time, he gets back to divorcing the number one and number two. The effects on the kids in all these situations is not good. If the Rabbanim give a heter and it's recognized, I think those kids would be accepted into yeshivas and would be viewed in the Jewish community as legitimate kids. I think they are. I know of cases. You know of cases, just you don't know the people who got remarried.
Regardless of religion or not.
by the men. Right, if you're over in a chayim d'Rabbeinu Gershon, let's say a guy didn't get a heter, you're right. It wouldn't be. It's not mamzer deraisa. I'm not even sure it's a full din mamzer d'Rabbanan, but it's a pagam. If you don't have a heter, it's definitely a pagam. It's a blemish, and it wouldn't be good for shidduchim. But if the person does have a heter me'Rabbanan, it might be the area that some people stay away. But the guy is definitely better off than the woman who absolutely has no halakhic leverage. If without a get, she can't get remarried. Now, there's one important halacha before we discuss anything about Gittin. It's a Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara, it's a Navav on the top of your sheets. The Gemara is talking about a particular halacha of a person has to give a speech by Kedushin, Haram Kedeshesli. So the Gemara goes through what happens if you have a case of where it's clear from the circumstances that what you're doing is getting married. Do you still need to use the words Arema Kodeshesli? So the Gemara has some situations where the Gemara says as long as they were involved in the process of getting married, and then it's obvious that what he's doing when he gives her the ring is for marriage, the Gemara seems to say that such a thing would work for Kedushin. All the Mefarshim hak. If you need an actual Amira, you're not doing this. So then the Gemara finishes off, reading 4 lines from the bottom. Now, Hadam Rav Yehuda Mishmol. Rav Yehuda Mishmol makes a statement. Kol she'eni yodea b'tiv gittin v'kedushin. Anyone who doesn't know the laws, tiv gittin and kedushin, the laws of gittin and kedushin, lo ye'esik iman. Don't get involved with them. So the Gemara asks, would that apply even to this relatively obscure halacha of giving a kedushin without spelling out Arema Kodeshesli? Amalei enachadami. Yeah, you got to know that too. Tosfos over there explains that the Gemara is asking, like, how far do you have to go in your vast bekiyas and Gittin and kedushin to serve here? This is a relatively not so shchiach case, not such a normal case. So this is a case that you have to, the one involved in getting kedushin has to be an absolute baki, and the Gemara is saying, yeah, you have to. Now halacha l'maisa, this Gemara is brought down Even HaEzer, Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer Siman Memtes. I'll read you the language. Kol mi she'einu baki b'tiv gittin v'kedushin. Person who's not an absolute expert in gittin and kedushin, lo yeh esek imayim. Don't get involved with them. Don't use them for Masada Kedushin. Don't use them to be involved with the get. Laholos behem, to learn from them. Shebekal yachol litos, it's very easy to make a mistake. The yater is a erva, and they permit you to be with the erva, which we just read this past week's parsha, big averos, not good. The gorim laharbos mamzerim b'Yisrael, and you're going to be the cause of mamzerim in Klal Yisrael. Obviously, a major responsibility, major achrayus. It's interesting, if you look on the Mefarshim in the Shulchan Aruch, it's actually machlokas. The Be'er Heita brings a taz that this does not apply, really, even though the Shulchan Aruch does say he's not a baki in Gittin and Kedushin, that's the language of the Gemara, but really this halacha mainly applies to get. Because get is much more intricate, all the halachas of Gittin, much more intricate than Kedushin. And for Kedushin, yeah, technically speaking, you could have a young Rav who doesn't have much, expertise in these things. In the olden days, right, he used to have a cantor perform the wedding. That don't just mean singing. He was, he was the one under the...
He was a tenor.
So, yeah, according to the Taz, according to the Be'er Heita, Kedushin, we don't have to be as makbid, but Gittin, that you need an expert. The Piskei Shuvas over there in the Shulchan Aruch brings a note of Yehuda that argues and says even by Kedushin you better make sure to have an expert. And nowadays, for the most part, in a lot of weddings, from circles, the Masada Kedushin is usually the biggest person in the house. Very chashav, Rav, Rosh Hashiva. Those are the people involved in setting up Kedushins. If people remember earlier this year, we gave a share about a ksuba, a mistake in a ksuba. And the situation actually over there was Masada Kedushin himself wasn't involved in the ksuba. He came later. And someone else was doing it. And, people make mistakes. Like a lot of halachas involved. So even Kedushin, I could hear the note of Yehuda Tzad that you need a bucky. But Kol Shekin, when it comes to a get, which hopefully is less frequent than Kedushin, people don't are involved in it as much. And, it has many intricate halachas, so hopefully those halachas are only handled by an expert. And I have to tell you a story. A few years ago, yeshiva here was learning the Seches Gittin, and towards the end of the year, after my Talmidim I felt had a pretty strong background in Gittin, I reached out to Rabbi Larfeld. Baruch Hashem, my family has a nice connection. My wife's family, like Grumblatt, dating back from early years. The family moved here to Florida, so we're very close to Rabbi Larfeld. And I reached out to him. I knew he was a bucky in Gittin, so I was wondering, could he give, practical rabbinics, he'd have some, insights to meet with my Talmidim. You know what Rabbi Larfeld said to me? He's like, so when do you want to come? I'm doing 2 Gittin this week, another one next week, the week after probably 2 more. I was like, what?
It's a booming business.
Rabbi Larfeld, and this is only 4 years ago. Rabbi Larfeld was constantly, unfortunately, involved in doing Gittin. And, I was expecting, he gave me a choice of dates. You want to come here, you want to come there. I picked the date that worked out, with sharing the Talmidim. We got, it was a BOGO. We got our money's worth. We watched 2 Gittin performed by him. It was one of the most amazing, what you call behind the scenes in the halacha events, shimush, that I've seen in my life. Unbelievable. I actually spoke to a few of my Talmidim that were there with me since Rabbi Larfeld's been nifter, and they all remember this like clear. I actually have beautiful pictures with it. Not of the people getting divorced. Right, we'll blur out those faces. I still remember the scene. Like we walked in, the people in the room that know Rabbi and Yibad L'chaim Rebbetzin Larfeld, they'll understand the story. We walk into the house, and there on their dining room table is a spread. Looks like Rebbetzin Larfeld's making a Shabbat brachos. There's cake, there's refreshments, there's all different things. She, boys are coming. She had to put out a spread. Okay, so we come there. I come in to meet Rabbi Larfeld, the Sofer, Rabbi Somar was there, 2 Eidim were there, and it's mamish like a party atmosphere. Joking around this. And then in walks in the first couple that didn't get divorced. And they walk into the scene. They see a rabbi. They see, some younger rabbi with lots of kids, teenagers, bachrim. What's going on here? All right, Larfeld, tells them, when you go for surgery in the hospital, many times you'll find interns watching the procedure. These are my rabbinic interns. Everyone's like, okay. Lamaisa, Rabbi Larfeld led those Gittin step by step. He explained to each party involved every step that's going on. He spent time with us actually before he did the Gittin and after he did the Gittin. You see why I did that? You see what it was that? Any questions? The most unbelievable welcoming. He was an absolute bucky. Showed us any questions we had. We found in this sefer, that sefer, this and that. Why do we need to do this? Why don't we need to do that? Unbelievable. Mamash amazing. And, it's a big loss to the world that we're missing somebody who's an absolute bucky in Tiv Gittin the Kedusha. But really, when we're going to discuss these topics today, topics which, are pretty heavy. Matering a mamzer, matering Eishes Ish. Just this past week, it's actually a nice postscript to the shir we gave last week. I missed it by a week. I was listening to a shir given by Reb Aaron Cutler's grandson, Aaron Reich. And he said that he heard from Talmidim, when Reb Aaron would encourage a Talmud, okay, you have an idea in the Gemara, you have a Pshat in the Tosas, you have a Svara, he would say to him, what's the level of how sure you are with that Pshat that you have in Gemara, Pshat in the Tosas? He says, would you say that Svara to Mater and Eshes Ish? Would you say that logic strong enough to permit a woman to get remarried? If you're that confident in that, that's the degree of how sure you have to be when it comes to learning. It's amazing. He was training his Talmidim in Lakewood. You know? You want to argue? You want to say that argument? How sure are you about it? Wishy-washy svaras? Wishy-washy svaras is not going to get you anywhere in life. To be a Bucky in Gittin and Kedushin, you have to be able to say something that's ironclad. You have to live with the responsibility for the rest of your life that you permitted this woman to get remarried. So, with that as an introduction, let us go visit the Gemara on Pei Chesem and Beis in Gittin. It's also on your sheets. The Gemara writes like this: Get Me'usa b'Yisrael kosher. Get Me'usa, Rashi over there says, a forced get. They physically beat a guy to give a get. If it was done in a Bezdin, by a Jews, kosher. Uve'odikal chavim, pasal. If it was done by a secular court, it's invalid. Uve'odikal chavim, chovdin l'sover omrim lo, asa mashi Yisrael omrim l'cha. The kosher. If a secular court forces a guy to give a get, like the rabbinic court, like Bezdin saying, then it'll be kosher. Now, if you just stop reading this Mishnah, you have this is why you have to understand the halachas quite clearly. Oh, it's Bavarish Mishnah. You're allowed to beat a guy to give a get. Right? Shiva has a shmooze, right? You force the guy until he wants to. He doesn't want to do it. Deep down, everyone wants to do it. So you see, you're allowed to force the guy. Big problem. That's not the halacha.
What about these secular get laws, like in New York?
Excellent. I'm going to get to that.
The secular court orders the
get to that.
Why are we referred to as kohanim? Why are we referred to as kohanim?
No, these are the Mishnah is contrasting between Jewish courts and secular courts. Run by the state of New York, for example.
Yes.
Which we'll get to the get laws. Yes.
What about a secular court that's doing it on a Jewish court's authority?
Yes, so we're going to talk about these cases. Really, the Mishnah would ask you about a secular court doing it with authority from a Jewish court. Yeah, so we'll talk about these cases. But let's not stop here, because we'll have the wrong impression. Amar of Nachman of Shmuel, get Me'usa b'Yisrael Gittin. If the get was forced in a Jewish court, Gittin, we'll see in a second what that means, kosher. But shelo Gittin, pasol, that get is pasol, uposel, and it messes up the children. The Gemara itself, Rav Nachman Shmuel, is making a clarification. Not all forced gets are kosher. Actually, the majority of them are possible. If it's a get Gittin, then it's kosher. Shelo Gittin, it's possible. What does it mean Gittin and Shelo Gittin? Again, a person can misunderstand that. Gittin sounds like, he did everything according to the law. Shelo Gittin means, I don't know, you didn't do it well. It's not what it means. Rashi over here says there's a major distinction why a person is getting divorced. What the Gemara means over here, Rashi says, Gittin, is a case of where the husband has a halakhic responsibility to divorce his wife. For example, if a woman is adulterous, a woman's a sota, right? She was immoral. She cheated on her husband. That woman has to be divorced from her husband. The husband has an absolute chiyuv. He can't live with her. He has to divorce her. If in a case like that, the guy doesn't want to give a get, that's where the Rabbanim get involved, where if you had a powerful Bezdin, there is, in such a case, the rabbinic right to force a person to do that. There's a concept in general that Bezdin can force people to do mitzvahs. So here, where there's an absolute chiyuv, unfortunately a person's wife is mizana, and he therefore can't be married to her, he has to divorce her. So these cases, there are other cases too, but cases of where the halacha states a husband must divorce his wife, and there he refuses to do it, so there the physical pressure, being a guy, that would be allowed in halacha. But any other case of a get, which practically are most of the Gittin cases, where unfortunately, halacha is a person who could divorce his wife when there's a difference of agreement. Right? You know the Gemara's example, right? They're arguing over the soup. Now, it doesn't mean every time you have an argument over the soup, you should be divorced.
The soup Nazi.
Right. he calls her, you call your wife a soup Nazi, that might be grounds for divorce. But Lamaisa, those type of things, of course, the halachas of Gittin apply, where there's a disagreement, the person, again, people should work these things out with the Rabbanim, they shouldn't end a marriage so quickly. Someone was bringing up before the share, there's definitely a concept of the skatu adoros. The generations as they go by get weaker and weaker. And one of the biggest area there's a weakness, we believe, in human frailty, is in the strength that people have to deal with coping issues, to deal with things. And in the earlier generations, where people will be sovel, they'll have patience, and they'll take situations which are not perfect, the younger generations are more, more disposable. And they're probably quicker to trigger a get. And Rabbanim know these things. They have to work with the people to see if they could come to, to save the marriage. But this Gemara is giving a very important distinction. If it's a get that came about because of just any type of machlokas, but not because he has an absolute obligation to divorce her, in such a case, one is not allowed to use physical force. And if one uses physical force to obtain that get, that get is possible. It means she cannot get remarried. And chas v'shalom, the children from that marriage would be mamzerim. It's a major, major issue. Now, you had a question before. Is it still relevant?
No, sort of. It's technical, but if he has a fee to give the get, shouldn't it just go automatic without the actual physical handing over?
If he has a chiyuv to give a get, shouldn't the guy do it without being physically forced? Of course.
No, shouldn't it go without being physically forced? Shouldn't the divorce take effect if he has a fee to give a get?
No. The way the question was asked, is it automatic just because a person has a chiyuv to give a get? Let's say a woman has to leave a marriage if she committed adultery. But it does not take effect automatically. The get, that's the Torah's prescription. The Torah prescribed, right, just like a person can't get married without doing a Maisa Kedushin, without doing an act of Kedushin, a person is not divorced unless you do the process of being divorced. There's no means of saying that, woman, she didn't listen to the responsibilities of marriage, so the marriage is void. I'm not a bucky in all Christian law. There's annulments, but in Judaism, the way a person gets divorced is only by get. There is a concept which maybe people are hinting at called nakach tos, which is extremely rarely used. It's a situation where some side was tricked in a tremendous way about the other side, and they never really agreed in the first place to that condition. And
Yeah.
that's the type of thing, they annulled retroactively the Kedushin. There are some cases which that clause was used probably within the last 10 to 20 years. There are a couple of cases of big Rabbanim invoking such things. It was major messes, and that's not within the scope of today's show. That's a big headache.
That's the same, like a known.
Right.
What he was asking before, isn't that saying, just like in order to acquire something, to make opinion, there has to be a physical, something that has to be transferred. So
Right.
It's like an unkinyan.
Right.
There has to be a physical transfer
Yes.
of something.
A get is a halachic process, which that's the only way. Without physically giving over the get, whether it's the person themselves, you can utilize a shliach, but without that, it does not work.
Doesn't it happen where one side doesn't disclose material medical situations?
Right. So the question was brought up, you could have cases, people hide medical facts out about the situation.
She's on
And
schizophrenic drugs.
that could potentially be an area of where mekach toast could be utilized. But I'm going to tell you, 99% of the time, even in those cases, they try to do again. Because utilizing the clause of mekach toast is a very dangerous waters. And once you open it, it's a tremendous Pandora's box. And we're afraid of this thing. You could have all these armchair quarterbacks. Oh, this sounds like grounds for an annulment. And it's the easiest way to get out of things. And the Rabbanim are fearful about doing such things. Absolutely fearful. And rightfully so.
That was actually used after the 2000, on 9/11. After 9/11, the Rabbanim used that rather than even a guna,
I'm not going to comment on that.
I don't know how.
These things are very, very tricky.
That's because they
And
couldn't pay
unfortunately, one of my rabbis used to say it straight, but I'll say it. The path to Gehenna is paved with good intentions. Rabbi Hachberg would always say that line. That, there are a lot of do-gooders, and people can be l'shem shamayim, but that doesn't mean they're really helping out. Right? They can be making matters much, much worse.
The assumption there was that these were well-named people who
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to do that.
Okay, so let me go through the Shulchan Aruch over here. Very important piece in the Shulchan Aruch. This is on the bottom right-hand side of your sheets. This is Even Ezer, Siman Kuf Nun Dalad, Sif Chaf Aleph. Kol Elu Sha'amru Lahotzi. All these cases where the Gemara says one must divorce his wife. Like we said, a case, an adulterous wife. Kofin, we force a guy, Afil Bishutim, even with whipping him, hitting him, caning him. The Yesh Omrim, however, there are some that say, Shekom Yishlo Nemerable B'Talmud B'Ferish, Kofin Lahotzi, El Yotzi. There, even cases which they say you have to go out of the marriage, that's not the same as Kofin Lahotzi. The Gemara itself makes two levels. So, in Kofin B'Shutim, in such a case, you can't force with physical force. The rabbis just tell you, you have a responsibility to get out of the marriage. And if you don't listen to what the rabbis say, they could call you an avarian. They could publicize that you're somebody who doesn't listen to what the rabbis say, but you can't physically force them to get divorced. Okay? The Ramah adds, the kivan the ikka plukta de rabusa, in cases of where there's a machlokas aposkim, what the right approach to do is in a certain case, which, as we know in rabbinic literature, there are many, many cases which fall into the category of a case which has a machlokas. It's best not to use physical force, because we're afraid, there's tremendous fear. Ramah is saying, we don't want a get that's forced. Because obviously a get that's forced will invalidate the get and will apostle the kids. So thus, the Ramah says if there's a suffix in a case, don't use force. And we'll see soon. I did see a tshuva from Rabbi Yosef, where Rabbi Yosef was definitely choshish for this Ramah, and was nervous. He was extra careful. You have to be careful not to do a forced get. Gotta be careful. Yes?
The stories from Muncie in New York about...
I'm about to get to that. Yes, it's a social media pressure.
I'm saying also about the story of the Rosh Hashiva, like the...
Right.
I'm saying, like, did that fall under halachic?
So I'm about to talk about that. Yes. Now, one more thing. So right now, if we stop here, we see that the use of physical force could be problematic in the average case of a get. Not just a little bit problematic, majorly problematic. The Ramah goes even further to say that even if it's a suffix, stay away from it. But I have to show you this other part, which is also very important. Skipping along. She'ain kovid b'shita. Any case where you're not allowed to use physical force. Eimanadin also gamkein. So first the Mordechai says we can't put you in nido. We can't totally excommunicate you from a community. Now I'm not sure about this. We have cases of people that don't get Gittin and they refuse going to Bezdin. First Bezdin gives a siruv. They publicly announce this person refused to come to Bezdin. And I have heard of cases where they do put a person in some type of excommunication. It could be that's not really viewed as nidui in the times of the Gemara and what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about over here, but I'm not sure. Makom makom, yichol nigzer al kol Yisrael. You could make. One is allowed to make proclamations on Jews. Shol lasas lo shum tova. Don't do any good to this guy. Don't give him Tomchei Shabbos. Don't do, maybe Hatzol shouldn't show up at this guy's house. Olisa v'litin imo. Don't do business with this guy. Olama b'nov. You should not be a mole for his kid's bris. Ola kovram. Chavre kadisha. Don't bury this bum. Ad shi garish. Until he divorces his wife.
Once he's dead, he can't divorce.
Correct. But obviously you gotta put in the threat before the guy's dead. Right? Sometimes you do the other way. We'll talk about that. You put in the threat, if you don't divorce, you will be dead. But we'll get to that. But here the Ramah is spelling out multiple avenues you can't physically force, but look what you could do.
Why didn't you just put him in favor?
Huh? Yeah. They're practically saying, don't do tovas with him, don't do business with him, don't give a meal to his son. And he says, "V'chol chomer she'yir tzebezin yechol ha'achma b'chai gavna mavashli ninoso." You could basically throw the book at him, do anything on him.
Is this a full cherem?
Huh?
Is this a full cherem or not?
No, I'm not even sure.
Is it just him, or is it says the kavram specifically plural?
Yeah,
His kids?
let's have to look at that number there. No, yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. It's a nice deal you have. Is a kovram saying not just on the husband didn't give the get, but also his kids? I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. That's not so pashut. But this Ramah does open the door that granted you can't use physical force against somebody, but what about these things are obviously some type of pressure one's being put under. He's being put under a certain duress that, hey, you don't give this get, these guys not going to do business with you. Used to do business with these firm people. We're out. You do this. I heard of a case, which we'll get to in a second, but I heard of a case. say a person wasn't giving a get. Let's say he was part of an organization like Hatzalah. So people contacted the heads of the organization, told what's going on with this member, and they dropped him. And it meant a lot to the guy. You know, the guy every Thursday night would go up to VIP Cholent, sit around, go through, you know, the week's cases. You know, Hatzalah is a lifestyle. We just dropped you from the force because they don't give your wife a get. That's good pressure.
Get kicked out of the kiddish club.
Yeah, get kicked out of the kiddish club. You know, unfortunately, you could probably make in some shows you make a kiddish club just so guys are not divorcing their wives. Unfortunately, right? But yeah, you know what you see from this Shulchan Aruch is there is a means of putting on some type of pressure. It's not physical pressure. You're not being the living daylights of the guy, but there is room to do things. Now, I would like now to go through some of these cases and really spend the most time on social media because that's the case that's garnered the most interest recently. But firstly to the case that happened a decade ago where there was a Bezdin, I knew of the Bezdin, where again, I assume that the starting point probably was they were motivated l'shem shamayim to help out women that, you know, that were igunas. But somewhere along the way, you know, the path to Gehenna is paved with good intentions. So they started physically beating the guy. So that's awesome. That's black and white. You cannot use absolute physical force. You can't beat the guy with cattle prods. Can't take him to the back of a van and just beat him up and give him a get to sign. That's going to be a forced get. And it's also scary because, you know, that's the type of thing. It's not just bad for that one instance which you know you'll be forced. You know, I don't know. What happened to all other Gittin this Bezdin did? Are they good Gittin, not good Gittin? That's a question. Now, I'm not sure what they ruled in that case. Could be they distinguished. But not a good look. And pashtas, such a case would be bad. However, I'll tell you another story, which I was privy. I was doing shimush. I was once with a certain Rav, and he told over the following story. This Rav, very, very, very world-renowned posek, told the following story. He has situations in his community where their husband's not giving Gittin. So what did he do? He said he had a member of the community who was a retired cop. He would go with him. Told me what he did. He'd go with him. He said we both would take with our talis and tefillin. We'd meet up with the husband who was not giving a get, and we would talk to him. You know, it's very important for you to give a get. The Rav would talk to him. It's very important you to get. And the guy would refuse. No, I'm not giving it over my dead body. One of those type of things. So, which at a certain point, the ex-cop would lean over, pull back his jacket, and sort of like show what he has on his waist, and say, "Well, you know, we could, you know, we could help bring that about if you don't give it. If you can tell me you're not going to give a get." They were threatening him. That's not physical force. They were threatening him. The Rav said he brought with his talis and tefillin because there were multiple times the guy would call the cops, and Taka they would spend the night in jail. The Rav and the ex-cop would spend the night in the slammer, so they needed talis and tefillin for that. But okay, I mean, let out the next morning. You know, usually the type of thing that wasn't too major. They're threatening the guy, but al pi halacha, that would be allowed. To physically beat the guy, that's a forced get. But a threat, such a thing?
You know, like with a gun.
Huh?
With a gun.
That's you know, you want to show you know, sometimes you have to speak the language that people understand.
Yeah, but Rebbe, they would know that that's an empty threat. They would know that.
Okay, so maybe I shouldn't be revealing this in the share. So if there's a guy listening to this share who doesn't want to give his wife a get, now he knows that some of these Rabbanim are just threatening him. They're not really going to pull through. So to that guy, buddy, give your wife a get. Okay. I assume,
Buddy, give your wife
you know. But yes, that's one area. Now, people brought up also before in the share, which also deserves its own topic, its own share. Financial pressure. Can one put financial pressure on a husband to give a get? There's one case I saw, let's say ahead of time, the husband puts into escrow, puts it, that if he doesn't divorce his wife, a penalty, this amount of money will be given to her. So there, he's under financial pressure. If he doesn't give a get, it's going to trigger, this money's going to go to her. So there are postscripts going back to Achronim, that matters thing. Because there, the money's already out of the husband's hands. It's already sitting in escrow. And although that's a pressure, but that's not dachuf to the same level as beating the guy over the head. And such a thing would be permitted. The poskim, though, debate, but what about if it's fresh money? If they make up a some halachic clause, if he doesn't give a get, now he'll have to pay X amount of money. So to save himself from paying now this money, that's a distinction. Even though it's same, sounds very similar, there's a force of money. But one, the mechanism was the money was already taken out of his, it's already sitting in escrow. On the other case, the guy would have to pay it now. That second case is more complicated. And really what I'm touching upon is there's two things. That there are these get laws which they made in New York, version 1, version 2, over the years. And it also gets involved in prenuptial agreements. And these, again, are really topics unto themselves. There are chashav rabbanim that permit these things. There are chashav rabbanim that are against signing these things and doing these things. And you know, some rabbanim swear by it. This is what saving Klal Yisrael and stopping agunos. But at the same time, you're measuring these things with potential for pressuring a husband in a way which could cause a forced get. And this issue is so central, forced get. That's what all these things center on. I got to tell you a case. I would not believe it if I didn't see it in print. I don't think you should believe it unless you saw it in print. So I put it on the sheets. Listen to this case. Years ago, they asked Rav Moshe Feinstein the following case. I'll call it a honey trap. A guy wasn't giving his wife a get. So people got involved. We got to do something to get this woman a get. They hired a woman to try to go out with the husband who didn't give a get to the wife. They went out multiple times, and as the husband is getting very into the second woman, she tells him, I heard you told me you're divorced. I just found out you didn't give a get to your wife. She trapped him. The guy wants to be with her. So okay, no.
That's fraud.
Call her back.
That's fraud in the industry.
Call her back. Okay, I'm ready to give her a get.
Fraud.
Gives a get, and she says, joke's on you.
Nice.
They asked, is one allowed to do such a thing? Dr. Moshe, 100% yes.
Nice.
You could trick a husband like with a honey trap to give such a get. But Moshe does warn the case, the way they describe the case, the guy was a para adam, sort of rubber person. Described, you know, he was a gambler.
He was a Rabyan.
Yeah. So Moshe was very nervous. What type of woman would agree, you know, to play this role with him? And if he's so grub, shouldn't she be worried about her own safety? So Moshe didn't think it's so practical to do such a case. But assuming the woman is safe, and Moshe split up the Farish, they should never be alone, that woman with this guy, and you know, should only be in public areas. But if they're willing to do such a thing, halakhically, that's not a forced get. That's a nice chap to how to beat the guy. Right? You could beat him with rods, or maybe you can't, but you beat him this way, that's a Fascinating
I thought
cop.
honey trap was gonna be, you're gonna smear him with honey and wait for the bees to sting him.
Boy, you have quite an imagination.
I know.
Right? But no, they weren't talking about killing the guy by death from bees. But let me get to our big issue, social media. What has happened literally in the past couple months. I remember back, still Rebbe in Brooklyn, it was a big thing. They started with lawn signs, or that there were husbands who weren't giving their wives a get. So there were these flash protests where they would put up like lawn signs all over Flatbush. Give your wife a get. You know, they put flyers on people's cars. You know, this guy's not giving his wife a get to publicly embarrass the guy. You know, sometimes it work, it wouldn't work. What you now have with social media, which started a couple months ago, is such a powerful tool. And I spoke to people who were involved in these cases in getting Gittin. It's a powerful tool, but you have to have rabbinic guidance and know how to use it. What basically is happening is people are not giving their wives a get. So people will start a social media campaign where they'll post on their WhatsApps, on their Instagrams, Facebook, publicizing this guy doesn't give his wife a get. And social media is a tremendous power. There are people in the frum world that have 50,000 people, 75,000 people, 100,000 followers. You know what that means? That means every time you post something, 50,000 people see it. 100,000 people see it. That is tremendously powerful. That's much more powerful than putting, you know, a flyer on someone's car in 2 blocks of Flatbush. That's very powerful. And once people have the picture, they could just send it to somebody else. Now, Hilchos Lashon Hara, once he refuses in Bezdin to give his wife a get, and there's a to'alas in spreading such a thing, you know, yeah, that's okay.
It's mutter?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Another aspect
Now,
with social media, another aspect is you see it a lot of the time with daven from so and so, and then 7 years later you see the same forward.
yeah. Okay, yes.
It just keeps cycling.
Yeah, true. But usually by the Gittin, if a guy gives a get, they'll find out about it. Well, let me go through this because I only have a couple minutes. So what I found out, it works, but you have to be careful how you use it. If a person feels too much pressure, then that could backfire. A person told me he was involved in a case with this. They use social media to spread the word about the locality of the husband not giving a get, but they only did it on smaller platforms. They didn't opt to use someone who has 50,000 people because they felt there'd be too much pressure. It's also tricky. Do you only publicize about the person not giving a get? What about the parents who are enabling? Let's say parents are financially supporting the husband, and not the ex-wife, the wife who's naguna. Let's say they're in his corner defending him, giving him backing. In these cases, a person not giving a get, really those people are at fault too. And the Rabbanim would give a heter to publicize about the parents too. But again, that's also strategically may not be a smart thing, because a lot of times in these cases, what you have to do is win over everybody. You're not just winning over the husband to give a get. You need the parents, the family, to help push him to give a get. And the more people you antagonize by using social media, sometimes that could backfire, and now they all dig in. They're one unified family standing up against the world. So you need a lot of seichel, rabbinic guidance, what you could do, what you can't do. But this too, social media, I did hear straight from poskim, multiple poskim, that it is a valid means of pressuring, just like we said in the Ramah, right? You could publicize, don't do business with this guy, don't do this, don't do that, 100%. The Ramah was talking about social media, right? He is a Makom Makom, Yachol Ligzer al Kol Yisrael. What Bezdin has the power to be Gozer on all Klal Yisrael, if not for Mr. WhatsApp? Rabbi WhatsApp. right? The Maisa, these are ways that you could get to people, and if done correctly, that might be the Yeshua that these agunas are waiting for. I'd just like to end with one story, which I think says a lot about the right attitude for someone who's involved in Gittin and these things. The story was said over at the Levaya and Lerfeld by one of his grandchildren. Amazing story. It seems the story happened in the past few years. One of the times when Lerfeld fell and got injured, and the next morning he needed surgery. And that night, the family was obviously being quite protective of Lerfeld in the house. He was going in the morning for surgery. He's an older person. He was in pain from a fall. And there's a knock at the door. And it's a couple that want to get divorced, reaching out to Rabbi Lerfeld. And the family didn't want to let him in. But Rabbi Lerfeld somehow prevailed upon them to let them in. The night before the surgery, Rabbi Lerfeld sat there with this couple, talking out their problems. What was going on in his own personal life didn't matter. The Maisa, I believe the end of the story was a happy ending.
Yeah.
They actually stayed together.
Yeah.
But look at the dedication of a Rav. Absolutely amazing. You know, to be involved in this business, and it's a thankless business. I remember Rabbi Lerfeld telling me, you know, I can make a lot of money on these Gittin. He says, I don't. It's totally l'shem shamayim. And, you know, when the Chazal talk about getting the Rabbanim getting their hands dirty, talks about the Kohanim. We just had the parshas before of Tazria Mitzorah seeing, you know, Tumah and Mums and Saras. You know, who wants to be a podiatrist? Who wants to see, you know, all of these things? But Huadin, no one wants to get in the gutter and deal with Gittin. And it's a very, very tough situation. It's the Wild West. There are people with all these innovative ideas of how to solve the problems, but it has to be really measured and really talked about with Gedolim. What's the right approach? And with the sensitivity to deal with people in a challenging point in their lives, when, who knows, maybe with the right sensitivity and the right words of chizuk, you can bring them back from going the direction of having a get. Thank you very much for listening, and wish everyone a wonderful week.
When it comes to sending out on social media, like if I see somebody posting something, should I assume that he got a good answer from a reliable Rav, that he should post it and therefore I should also repost it, or should I see it and ask a shayla again myself?
It's a good question, very good question.
Like the one that I'm assuming the one you were thinking of, went around recently.
There are a few, yeah.
Reposting, like, what do I know? People